Hello and welcome to episode 46 of the Australian Roundtable Podcast on Sunday, the 23rd of August, 2015. I'm your host, John LeBond, and I'm joined in the studio by Ethan Nash of TOTT News. Ethan, thanks for being here.
Good to be here, Johnno.
And we've also got with us live in the studio the Silver Fox himself, our resident wise old elder. Lindsay, how are you today?
Yeah, good. I'm good. Thank you very much for having me.
And we've also got a live audience once again today who might join us in the after show. We'll speak more of that later. For new listeners, the ARP is a Brisbane-based independent news analysis discussion roundtable, which broadcasts live every Sunday from about 3 p.m. Live listeners can take part in a live chat forum at the YouTube channel during broadcast. So hello to everybody who's there right now. All episodes are archived at that channel and are also available in MP3 format for you to download for free from our website, ausroundtable.com. That's AUSroundtable.com. Views presented by individual panelists and guests are not necessarily representative of the entire panel, and all important information cited during the broadcast will be linked to at our site so you can verify and analyze it for yourself, which we always recommend you do. Episodes generally run for 2 hours, and we've got a lot to get through today, which is why I'm rushing a little bit. Big rundown today, Ethan. Let's get to it right now. In the intro section, we'll talk about the Vegemite ban update. We'll also talk about a new boogeyman, same as the old boogeyman. In domestic, we've got 6 topics: Sydney siege propaganda overdrive, Abbott government to change environment laws, environmentalist absurdity and hypocrisy, the China Free Trade Agreement propaganda, Murdoch pushing blatant cultural Marxism, an update on Australia's involvement against AEST. Then in international, we've got 3 segments: US rabbis are supporting the Iran deal, the World Bank critics attacked and jailed, and polls suggesting that Greeks think Jews have too much power. So another action-packed show. I am rushing because we've got lots to get through, but we will start off with a general chat. Ethan, you've made the trip up from the southern part of southeast Queensland. How are you today?
Yeah, it's good, Johnno. Good to be back.
Yeah.
Our weeks go past, we only see each other once a week, and if you can't make it up a couple times for 2 shows, and it's a fortnight's gone, then a month's gone, so it's good to see you again, my friend.
The truth is, you don't really like hanging out with me anymore, ever since I formed those views that we don't speak about on this show. But you've made the trip up here because we've got with us, one of our listeners has made the trip up to Brisbane. And isn't it exciting to have a live audience while we do the show, hey?
we spoke about this off air all the time, when we started this show, it was a way to provide a platform for people who felt like they were alone or felt like they didn't really have anyone to talk to come together and to try and form some sort of community. So to have someone fly up here from another state to come and meet us, just someone we met online doing this platform, that the rewards are they're very surreal to me.
He bought us a slab of Bogues draft last night, and I don't even know if there's any left. If there isn't, he might go and grab another slab. He's nodding his head. Look at him. And Lindsay, you've also made the trip out. You usually come with food, but today no.
I was feeling, see the size of my gut. That's the first thing. I was feeling full, so I didn't. But you can put. Oh no, I won't be able to put an order in next week because my mother's coming out of hospital, so this may be the last time for a while.
This could be the last chance that we get to do the live show all together, and it is a lot of fun. I'm glad you guys made the trip. Another action-packed show today. We better get straight into it. The first thing that we do with these shows is take a quick look at some of the funnier sides of the news, and the first one is to do with an update on the Vegemite ban, Lindsay.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. It sort of struck me during the week. It was in the Courier Mail, page 7, on the 21st of August. The headline read, "Second shot at Vegemite brew." And I'll just run the quote straight past you. "The Federal Indigenous Affairs Minister has launched a strident defence of his warning about Vegemite being used in home brews in Indigenous communities, saying it was authorities who tipped him off. Senator Nigel Scullion described the iconic food as a, quote, precursor to misery," end of quote. No, that's just to say what I felt about it. Earlier this month, telling the Sunday Mail that children in some communities were too hungover to go to school after drinking homemade brews made with the concentrated yeast extract. And my comment on all this was, I was going to suggest we make another retraction after last week and apologise, but I'm finding these ministers are so confused themselves. We may end up dealing with this subject every week until 2020, the way we're going. It just keeps, every week there's something else. Anyway, the crew in Canberra are really a bunch of Keystone Cops or Three Stooges or Monty Python, all mixed into one. And they expect us to take them seriously over other administrative matters like taxation and travelling allowances, etc. And what surprises me most is that we apparently allow them to make laws to govern us. Now, how stupid are we? Anyway, I'll just see if he's got any more up what he thinks about
a precursor to misery.
Yes.
Oh my goodness! These stories every week. Not only they're not only taking up precious space on pages that get distributed to thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, or on the internet, which is digitally. Then it's not only doing that, but these people, they must get a kick out of it, sitting around thinking of ways that they could think of it. I mean, where do you draw the line, Johnno, with this sort of nonsense?
Yeah, and for those who are just tuning in, maybe didn't see the last couple of episodes, of course, the background here is, can you use Vegemite to make your own alcohol? Because if you can, they want to ban it from Indigenous communities for fear that they're going to use the Vegemite to make their own alcohol. And what we're saying here is they can't even tell us whether or not you can use Vegemite to make alcohol, despite the fact they've already started debating whether or not they should be banning it in these. When you say Keystone Cops, you're not mucking around. And then you think about it, these are the same people who decide how much you get taxed when you go and work to feed your family and to put a roof over your own head. These are the same people.
Yeah, I know. The mind boggles, doesn't it?
It really does. We'll move on to the second topic of the intro section, a new boogeyman, same as the old boogeyman, Ethan.
Yeah, Johnno, I saw this on August 19th in an article from news.com.au entitled, Osama bin Laden's youngest son appears from obscurity to post audio message to Al-Qaeda supporters. That's the title of the article. And I'll just read it here because it just blew my mind. He's the youngest son of former Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden, and now he's primed to claim his father's legacy. An alarming audio message has been circulating on social media, which purports to contain a message from the young man known as the Crown Prince of Terror, calling for lone wolf attacks against the West. The audio clip has been shared around by Al-Qaeda supporters on Twitter, and is the first time propaganda produced by the terrorist group has presented Hamza bin Laden as an official member, according to the BBC. In the recording, he urges Al-Qaeda members to move the war from Kabul, Gaza, and Baghdad to Washington, London, Paris, and Tel Aviv. He called it the duty of the group's adherents to attack Jewish American interests globally and promoted the carrying out of lone wolf attacks to do so. And then it goes on just with nonsense. And the way that just reading all this nonsense, the article goes on for a long time. It talks about the history of bin Laden, talks about how old his son is, where he was graduated. And so I sort of contextualized it all in a final statement to really sum up the official story. And it was, so what we're seeing here is the son of a man who was dumped in the middle of the ocean, being groomed to avenge his fallen father from the depths of Davy Jones' locker, by calling from an attack on Jewish Americans through social media accounts and hacking divisions from the middle of the desert halfway across the planet. Yeah. And that's what the media are trying to say to us, Lindsay. I mean, Osama bin Laden's son's now on the rise. I think we're in a bit of trouble, Lindsay.
Yeah. And when you're just saying that, I thought, they're using social media, which are owned by the Jews, to say kill all the Jews who own the media. It's just the mind boggles. And before we come on air, we were thinking about this. And we're saying, it's like you have a movie Zorro, and then you have the son of Zorro, and where does it end?
Yeah, it certainly is. It's just something that you see, and they call him the prince, the crown of terror, or whatever they said in the article. I mean, the problem is that people are believing this. A lot of people are scared. Someone actually brought it up with me this week.
Which part of this story doesn't seem believable to you?
The one where...
Can't you just imagine this young man sitting away in a cave somewhere, just seething, and they even buried my father at sea. I will come for them.
As you put it that way, it is very, very...
I was out for breakfast this morning with a listener who's there on the couch, and an old lady walked up to us. She'd overheard our conversation and walked up, and sure enough, she was telling us about the terrors of ISIS, and people do believe this nonsense. That's the thing. People actually believe this stuff, and these are the people who get to vote. So you tell me you think democracy works. It works for the people churning out this nonsense. They can get people to believe anything.
And that's exactly what it is. So, and Osama bin Laden's child is still a child. You see him in the photos, he's still, but then again, we've got ginger jihadis running around, blonde-haired, blue-eyed school captains running around. The garbage that we're fed every day is just, it really is just no words.
What I'm saying here, it doesn't so much bother me that they print this stuff. What bothers me is there are people who genuinely believe it. And for questioning this story, they'd call us crazy.
Yeah.
You just go on believing that Osama bin Laden's son is coming to get you. And you can call us the crazy ones if that makes you feel better, Lindsay.
Yes, I agree. But anyway, there's nothing much more I can add to this.
Well, let's move on to the domestic segment proper. And it's a nice little segue. Our first topic is to do with Sydney siege propaganda on overdrive.
Okay, well, this is mine, I think. I've got a number of articles. I won't read very much from them because I think it's like 6 articles. I'll start, first of all, it started on the 17th of this month. The 17th this month. And it was in the Courier Mail, page 8, and the headline said, Inquest turns to origin of siege gun. Quote, the details of where Man Morris obtained his illegal pump-action shotgun and how it was smuggled into Australia are among the issues to be examined as the Link Cafe siege inquest resumes today. And then the next one was rookie prosecutor sets Monis free, and that was on page 2 on the 18th. That's the following day. And the quote from that was, a rookie solicitor doing his first bail hearing bungled the bail application by Man Morris 2 months before the deadly Link Cafe siege in December. It was alleged yesterday. And then the next one was on the following day, the 19th, and the headline was, reason killer was free. Police should have arrested man Harmon Morris when 40 fresh sexual assault charges were laid against him 2 months before he stormed the Link Cafe in Sydney, the Department of Public Prosecutions has suggested. And then the next one was on the 21st of August, and the headline was, Detective, I believed it was Morris, and quote, Monis, quote, not long after the Sydney siege began, police knew they were dealing with a dangerous man who was at the centre of a murder investigation. New evidence has revealed. And then finally, on the 22nd of August, the headline was, Cafe victims denied cash. Victims in their Link Cafe will be denied access, victims of the Link Cafe will be denied access to a generous federal government compensation scheme which provides $75,000 to Australians injured overseas. Now, that last one pretty much says it all for me. If it's a compensation scheme designed for people overseas, why are you even bothering to put it in the paper to say that they should be entitled to it? It's just, anyway. But I think the thing was that we talked about this last week, and then lo and behold, this week we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 day after day after day after day, and a lot of it's just absolute nonsense. So I'll hand it over to you, Johnno, first. Well, you have a say.
At the time of the event, episodes, I think it was 11, 12, and 13 of the ARP, we broke that event down as the hoax that it was. It was a blatant hoax. Nobody died. Nobody got hurt. Here we are, 8 or 9 months later, and we've just seen, this is from the Courier Mail, the only daily newspaper in Brisbane, has had an article every day for 5 days straight, still pushing this notion that the event was real. And you have to wonder, Ethan, why in August of 2015 do they feel the need to have an article about the Sydney siege every day for 5 days straight?
Don't know, Johnno. It could be for a number of reasons, but when we think back, it's the weeks can go so fast past us, but it's almost coming up in a few months to a year since the Sydney siege happened. This is how long the show's been going, and how long we've covered it. So for them to still be regurgitating it on such a daily basis, it's to remind people that the anniversary is coming up. Then there'll be more propaganda about it. It's to remind people there's still boogeymen out there coming to get them. Look at Harmon Morris. Look at what he did. It's going to happen. Yeah. We need to keep this heightened level of security and just reinforce the notion into people's minds that the government is here for you to protect you, but you still need to be afraid.
I think that's what's going on. They're going to start ramping this propaganda up right through to Christmas. And of course, the event took place a couple of weeks before Christmas, so they tied the event in with Christmas. So I think we can expect every Christmas going forward, they're going to be ratcheting up the Link Cafe fear-based psychological trauma. And for me, that's all that this is. They've already implanted in people's minds this idea that a bad man killed these lovely people and held the nation, at crisis, whatever. Now they just have to put these articles in every day to keep bringing that fear-based trauma to the surface. And for me, that's the issue here. Once you understand that the Link Cafe siege was a hoax, nobody died, nobody got hurt, when you're reading these articles, you're not just saying, hey, hold on, you're lying about this. Why are you lying? It is fear-based psychological trauma, and it's pretty sick and disgusting, really, if you think about it.
Yeah. I was just thinking about our guest from Sydney. We should get him to go around all the florists around that area and just see whether they've already started the thing for another florist display. Yeah. No, you never know, do you?
Probably in commemoration.
No, it's so planned and organised. It's unbelievable. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if something like that is going on behind the scenes.
And many people, when you tell them that the media do induce this fear-based psychological trauma on you, they don't believe you. They call you a kook and a conspiracy theorist. Then you walk down the road to the nearest university and you see people doing a Bachelor of Journalism. They're being taught how to do that, how to incite fear to manipulate public opinion, so then they can create the public opinion, i.e. all terrorists, Muslims are all terrorists, etc., and then they can manipulate public opinion, create false events to generate revenue and serve their agenda, and it just keeps people in fear. But so that's happening in universities, and people are learning how to do that, but people on the street don't believe it, despite how blatant it is, and that's all we're seeing with this story.
And I've had people tell me that even though they know that the media coverage of the whole thing was farcical, that their friends and family, they witnessed them crying during the 60-minute special, the Channel 7 special. They witnessed their family members having these emotional responses like Pavlovian dogs who've been trained to do that. They really believe this stuff is real. And while we could sit here and say, well, you're falling for a silly story that has no evidence, well, they trust the TV, and that trust in their TV is being used against them to make them feel terrible about an event that never happened. And here we are in August, every day for 5 days straight. They're still doing it. It's incredible stuff. We need to move on to the second topic of domestic. It's to do with Abbott government changing environment laws, Ethan.
Yeah, thanks, Johnno. And this was a story that I saw this week that was the most important in my mind that popped up. So I'll just read out an article from the Sydney Morning Herald on August 18th entitled "Abbott Government to Change Environment Laws in Crackdown on Vigilante Green Groups." Quote, "Environment groups will be forbidden from challenging large developments in court as the Abbott government responds to the controversial decision that stopped Australia's largest coal project, Adani Carmichael's coal mine, in its tracks. Attorney General George Brandis will move to repeal a section of Australia's environment laws that allows conservationists to challenge environment approvals for mining projects and other large developments. It comes after Prime Minister Tony Abbott labelled as sabotage a successful challenge by the Queensland Conservation Group in the federal court that halted the Carmichael coal mine in central Queensland. Mackay Conservation Group and the Environmental Minister Greg Hunt agreed the company's federal environment approval should be set aside after the challenge successfully exposed the government's failure to properly consider 2 threatened species. Mr. Abbott declared in the aftermath that it would be quote, tragic for the wider world if the projects like this could not proceed because they are confronted with endlessly frustrated by environmentalists, And so George Brandis will put the amendments to Parliament this week, and the crackdown has been described by Greens, environment and community groups as an attack on democracy that will limit the rights of communities to ensure the country's environmental laws are being upheld, end quote. Now, first of all, let's look at what's being said here. In context, after a Queensland conservationist group in the federal court halted the Carmichael coal mine in central Queensland, our Prime Minister called it a sabotage and said it would be tragic for the wider world if projects like this could not proceed. Just think about that. As a result, Senator Brandis, the highest lawmaker in the country, will put the amendments to Parliament this week to repeal a section of Australia's Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act that allows for these challenges to be valid and legal. Now, it doesn't matter where you stand on whether laws are valid, the so-called laws will have an effect, where you stand on the current situation that we're in legally, or as a masquerading legal system. I've always said, if people have the perception that they're real, it's still going to have an effect. If people believe that these laws are real, they're still going to have an effect, and that's why this was important. Now, we've already seen, as we mentioned on the show numerous times, so many attempts all across the country, whether it be in Tasmania, the Vlad laws in Queensland, to Victoria's move on orders, all of these attempts to destroy civil liberties and fundamental rights to protest and oppose activities all over the country. So in this story, we're witnessing big corporate interests retreating into defense mode after the little man, the common people, overcame their agenda. And we have already seen the same results with the Battle of Bentley, which was one of the biggest coal seam gas victories in the company's history. So as a result of these precedents, Lindsay, our government is looking to repeal the ability to do that in the first place. And in my estimation, that's tyranny when you think about it.
Yeah. I'm no great lover of the green groups because I've seen them go over the top, and I'll probably talk about that later. But But there was an article in the paper on the same topic in the Courier Mail during the week, and I didn't bring it up here, but they were dumping on farmers for lock the gate, that sort of thing as well. And it's so obvious that these poor people are living, you know, they turn their tap on and they can light the water as it comes out of their tap and whatever. And yet they will be the ones who will be covered up with this. If they do away with those laws, there's absolutely no hope that those people can get compensation for whatever losses they've made, etc., etc. So yeah, I agree with you entirely. I don't know about you, Johnno. Do you have a feeling about this or not?
Well, I read a comment from the live chat. Depopulation Agenda says that in his opinion, a lot of environmental groups are conflict of interest fronts, and even though the majority of members have the right intentions, they don't understand the agendas that are being pushed through the environmentalist groups. So I'm with you that most of the so-called environmentalist groups to me aren't for the environment whatsoever. Most of the members think they are. If they really were, though, they would be against things like mass immigration. But you never hear them speak about that. So they're not really here about the environment. They're here about whatever conflict of interest agenda it is that's being pushed from the people above them. And I agree with Depopulation Agenda about that. Ethan, back to you.
Well, with this story, you know, obviously I agree about the groups themselves, but with this story, we're not focusing on the groups. We're focusing on the law itself that allows for people to challenge this. It's called being, you can be a vigilante legally. If it affects you, it affects your town, it affects your environment, you can be a legal vigilant in this legislation. I had to read of it. You can legally do this and challenge it in the courts. And with the Battle of Bentley, with stopping the Carmichael coal mine, which are two massive victories against corporations, the little men against corporations, George Brandis and Abbott are coming out and saying, well, we're going to repeal the legislation so you can't legally do that and you're all going to get thrown in jail. And this is what I thought was the most important part, no matter what you think of the Greens or the environmental groups. If it was me and you or a group of us that were trying to stop a coal mine here in Brisbane getting put in, soon in the future after they do this, we wouldn't have the opportunity to do so. So it's tyranny just in its plain form, taking away the right to be able to oppose big corporate interests and corporations, especially as something as precious as the environment, real environmental issues like this that get disguised. So that's what I thought was the most important.
No, I agree with you entirely on that. And you're quite right. That's what I was saying about the Lock the Gate group and whatever. They're only individual farmers. They've been, and I suspect that the Queensland government have been getting kickbacks from these big companies, and that's why they're being allowed to go in there. There's talk about the police helping out the companies and all that sort of thing. So yeah, I agree with you on that. Yeah. And when you were talking about the laws before, it doesn't matter whether they're real or not, as long as they send out policemen with guns on their hips, they're going to enforce it. So yeah.
So and that's exactly what I thought, because I'd say, you know, they shouldn't have these laws in the first place, and we're going to speak about that on a future episode and whatnot. But it's always the perception. If the people believe it's real, if the state's coming after them with police and guns and badges, you know, the perception is going to be real. It's the same as money. It's worthless, but people believe it has value. So, so I just wanted to bring this up, and you know, as a final thought, I just want to tell people I'll give them an update, because you know, I obviously follow the Senate. I'll look at the legislation. I'll update them about what the amendments will be, John. But looking at the surface, they're just eroding our rights every day of the week, and not many people are hearing about this because it's not getting the coverage it deserves.
It's like George Carlin said, nobody seems to notice, nobody seems to care. And right now in the live chat, a couple of people talking about the Battle of Bentley. They weren't familiar with it, so they're going to go and look it up. And that's one of the ideas of this show, is just get ideas out there for people to go and do their own research. You know, there might be things that you haven't heard of where you can talk about them. You can go and do your own research, and listeners can get in touch with us if they think there's a topic we should be talking about. They can send an email through to us. We can look into it, give our thoughts on it, and hopefully listeners can then go and do their own research. That's what it's all about. If you're not doing your own research, what are you really learning? So hopefully people will take what you've just said as a prompt to go look into these things further and inform themselves. We'll move on to the third topic for domestic. It's to do with environmentalist absurdity and hypocrisy, Lindsay.
Okay, thank you for that. Just there were three different things. They're completely different makeup altogether, but they came together in my mind. Now, that might say more about my mind than it does about the stories. But anyway, I'll start off with, excuse me. This is the Courier Mail, page 15, on the 17th of August, and the headline read, "Green plea to Premier on balloons." Quote, "Conservationists have called on Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk to back her Environment Minister Stephen Miles in his inquiry into a possible ban on helium balloons. Former Queensland National Parks and Wildlife Service Ranger Anthony M-U-Y-T, Mute, said he did not like the idea of bans, but balloons did substantial damage to wildlife. And then that was followed by another story on page 37 of the Courier Mail on the 22nd of August. And the headline read, Wicker Ed, way to go, which anyway, you'll see as we get into the story. Quote, eco funerals are gaining ground as more people ditch timber caskets to consider the impact their body will have on the environment. Some eco-conscious people are even requesting to be buried upright to save space, with the country's only vertical burial ground located in Victoria. And then the third one, on page 17 of the Courier Mail on the 18th of August, said NASA puts rocket up for manned Mars trip. And the quote from that was, NASA has for the first time fired up a 12 million horsepower engine that will one day take astronauts to Mars. The RS-25 engine was tested at Stennis Space Station in Mississippi. It burned for 9 minutes and used 9 swimming pools worth of fuel. And that's the end of the quote. Now, my comment on this, and Ethan, I'll ask you in a minute when I'm finished what your take is on this, because is it just me, or can others see a disconnect here? That's for the want of a better word. I have to be buried standing up to save the Earth, but NASA can burn 9 swimming pools of fuel to test an engine for 9 minutes. Now, it reminds me of people who are eager to spend large amounts of money buying solar panels, which have most likely used up more electricity in the refined aluminium construction than they will ever produce from the sun in their entire life. Now, like I said, have you got a comment on this? Or can you see what I'm coming at?
I completely identify with what you're saying there, Lindsay. You know, it's always been the thing that, you know, it's just the impunity that these corporations have, and you know, this story is a perfect example of us. Versus, and it goes into a complex sort of range, and it's the way that the environmental movement has been misguided. You know, because now the environmental groups are focusing on climate change and global warming and all of these things, but they're not focusing on real environmental issues, which, you know, include stories like this, include pollution and include, you know, the destruction of rural regions and super city, like all of these real environmental issues, the destruction of wildlife and all of this thing that's happening. You can see that, you know, the environmentalist groups have been swayed for a reason, and that's exactly why. You know, you'd face an uphill fight against these people. You know, we're always told every day, you know, it's our fault. It's our fault that this is happening. It's our fault that the climate is changing. Have smaller houses, you know, drive green cars, don't do this, don't breathe the air, you know, because CO2s are a pollutant. Yet all of these companies get to do it, Johnno. It's clear hypocrisy. Right?
Yeah, I saw these articles in Lindsay's rundown, and I thought, where do I start with this one? Manned missions to Mars. Go and watch Capricorn 1 is all I have to say about that one for now. Maybe we'll talk about that more in the after show. But as for this environmentalist idea of, you guys are the problem, the only way that we can fix it is to take away more of your rights and give more power to the state to tax you, more power to the state to regulate any businesses that you're involved in, what have you. They've actually convinced young people who want to help the environment, who have the right idea, they've convinced them that the way to do that is to support the government taking more power. Now, if people can't see how environmentalism in that essence, like in that essential way, has been subverted, then I can't help them. It's obvious to me what they're doing. And this is a classic case, to the point where people are now thinking, I'll get myself buried upright to help the environment. I mean, what more can you say?
Yeah. No, I agree. And my thing with it was that I've thought about this for a long time. All the nonsense that goes on about, you know, don't use energy in your house, you know, use a blanket instead of turning the heater on and all this sort of stuff. And yet we've just had the last couple of weeks, we've had a big stir about the travel allowance for all these politicians heading overseas, heading interstate all the time, using helicopters, and nobody says anything about that. I mean, they're using more fuel or whatever in one day in their helicopter than you and I'd use in a year, and yet nobody says anything about it. That's what I can't. You know, it's sort of like that's what I said. Disconnect. I don't know what another word for it would be, but they just don't seem to be able to bring the two things together. So anyway, that's why I brought it up.
I remember when U2 toured Australia, maybe 10 years ago now, and of course Bono is, he fronts as an environmentalist or whatever. And at the time it was revealed they were flying 2 jumbo jets. Like, don't quote me on this, but I think it was 2 jumbo jets just to move all of the materials they needed, plus the people who were part of his crew or whatever, all around the world for this world tour. And then he'd get on stage and talk about how the people in the crowd needed to use less water. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just complete hypocrisy, but there's so much money to be made by claiming to be an environmentalist. And there's the cognitive disconnect that people have when they know full well that Al Gore has a big mansion and a pool and all this. They know that. But because they think that Al Gore is fighting for the environment, they'll give him a pass. No, it's me. I'm the one that has to sacrifice. We're lucky to have these. It's just like religion. It's scientism, this modern environmentalism. It's just like a religion where they give their parishioners at the front a pass mark, but they themselves take on the burden of having to do less. And again, it's kind of sick and disgusting when you really think about what's going on. The rank hypocrisy that these people are displaying when they're sitting there telling you, you have to use less, and your children even less again. Meanwhile, they live in mansions and they're flying all around the world, and it's just complete rank hypocrisy.
And we can't, now they're teaching children and adults, they're teaching children in school and adults at University of Queensland, just down the road, Johnno. They're teaching them how to combat people that think otherwise. So it's going to be complete indoctrination. Eventually, we're going to be living in little huts, and it's your fault, it's your fault. Well, they're out on their yachts and whatnot. It's the world that they envision, because they're completely going for broke here. They want to completely subvert almost everyone that cares about it. So this is just another perfect example of that hypocrisy.
Yeah. Remember that book? I don't know if you do. There was a large book from about 2000 or something.
Oh, the UN?
The UN. Yeah, I remember in there when I first got that was their big thing, was we're going to do away with golf courses. We're going to do away with air conditioning. They just rattled all the stuff off they're going to do away with in the future.
Yep.
And it's all part of this. This propaganda is all part of that, I assume.
Yeah, and it's hard because a lot of people, as we always say, they have the best intentions at hand. They really genuinely think that they're doing something. They care about the earth. They care about the environment around them. They want their environment to be better. You know what I mean? But they've just been completely co-opted, and now it's just getting worse because the indoctrination will continue to a point where people are considering being buried standing up. How far can you go?
That's right. Just when I read that, I thought, this is a bit too much for me.
I've said this before on the show. You just try as your own little social experiment. Speak to people on the street. Ask them if they think the sea levels are rising, and if they do think that, how much do you think the sea levels have risen? And what I find when I do this is a lot of people actually believe the sea levels have already risen. I've had one person tell me a couple of meters. I said, you think the sea levels have risen a couple of meters? And he was like, yeah, I think so. He had no idea. Of course, we know that's not the case at all. At best, they tell us, well, we have satellites that have proven that they've risen a couple of millimeters. And if we extrapolate that, so if you want to believe that they've got the satellites, and if you want to believe the sea level has risen a couple of millimeters, let's just go with that for now. The sea levels haven't risen a couple of meters. So then you have to ask, why would people out there actually believe that the sea levels have risen by as much as they believe they have? That's how much propaganda is there at school and through TV. They can just constantly reinforce these images of sea levels rising, and this is what we have to fear, and your children are going to pay if you don't have less now. And before long, that becomes people's worldview. They actually believe the sea levels have already begun to rise by these dramatic amounts. And it's simply not true. The amount of misinformation and disinformation that's out there about what's actually happening today is incredible, but they've got the schools, they've got the TVs, they can get people to think whatever they want them to think, Ethan.
That's exactly right. And it's an uphill battle, because we say it all the time, it literally is a war on information. And the information is dwindling every day. And it's only with programs like this, it's only with programs, alternative media, independent media, that another side of the story can get out, because the schools aren't going to teach them. The family unit is mostly corrupted and completely brainwashed by the television in this country. The government puppets, no one knows what's really going on. So, whenever you try to present another side of the story, it doesn't work.
Well, the problem isn't just that they haven't been taught the truth. They've been indoctrinated with the lies. And when you understand that, it's a whole other kettle of fish. It goes from thinking, oh, all I have to do is give them the correct information, they'll change their mind. That's not how it works. Once somebody's been indoctrinated, it's very rare that you'll be able to undo the indoctrination with evidence, because then what you get is cognitive dissonance, where they've got one set of beliefs, now you're providing new information. They can't hold both at the same time. They're going to go with their worldview. And the worldview was already being shaped at a young age by schools and by television. And once you understand that what we're dealing with isn't just that these people are misinformed, that they're indoctrinated, then you see, like you said, Ethan, it's an uphill battle. If you think you're going to change their minds with your information and your evidence, you've got another thing coming, because you're up against a worldview that was shaped when they were little children by their teachers saying, you've been born into a pretty bad time because the humans who came before you, they messed the place up. And now it's up to you to fix it by living with less. You raise a child to believe that from a young age, and good luck trying to change their minds.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And it does make every one of these people who listen to this program very valuable. We haven't got that many listeners, but every one of those is important, isn't it? When you look at the behemoth we're up against. Anyway, I really haven't got any more to say on it.
Well, we better move on to the next topic. We've actually got 50 people watching live, Lindsay, would you believe?
My goodness me.
We've got them up. We've actually got the listeners who are wondering. We've got the live comments up on the big screen, so Gary can just sit there chilling on the couch. If you can hear some creaking in the background, that's old mate Gary just stretching on the old sofa. I got that one for free when I moved into the house, actually. Oh, is that Ethan's chair doing all the creaking?
I've got the creaky chair.
The old creaky chair. Well, I apologise to listeners if you can hear the creak. We need to move on to the fourth topic for domestic, and that's to do with the China Free Trade Agreement propaganda, Lindsay.
Yeah, thanks for that. This was in the Courier Mail on page 21 on the 17th of August. And the headline said, Tony Abbott, free trade key to Australia's future. And I'll quote, Australia's free trade agreement with China will change Australia for the better. It will change China for the better. And it will change our region and our world for the better. It's going to change everything. It will secure the jobs of generations of Australians to come. It will provide massive new markets for our entrepreneurs. It will provide investment opportunities that will enrich both peoples. It is an agreement that is fundamentally fair, giving our nations unprecedented access to each other's markets. It removes barriers to Australian agricultural exports, including beef, dairy, lamb, wine, horticulture and seafood, so much so that Meat and Livestock Australia forecast that their sector will benefit by $11 billion over the next decade. The FTA means duty-free entry for 99.9% of our resources, energy and manufacturing exports within 4 years. So much so that the Minerals Council of Australia say that this will remove nearly $600 million in costs from the bilateral minerals and energy trade. Remarkably, China has agreed to Australia gaining the most substantial market access of any of its FTA partners, apart from Hong Kong and Macau. Australia's banks will be able to expand branch networks into China. Australian fund managers will be able to invest overseas on behalf of qualified Chinese institutions, and Australian insurers will be able to provide third-party motor vehicle insurance in China. As I travel around the country, I am often asked about Australia's jobs for the future. The answer is crystal clear. The jobs of the future will be found in the markets of the future. Now, there was another one that followed on from this, and it was on page 11 on the 17th of August as well. And it was basically somebody, we were talking about this before too, how you have the same topic raised twice in the same newspaper. This was by one of their journalists, and it said, quote, the Construction, Forestry, Mining and Energy Union has already launched a television campaign warning the deal will allow Chinese workers to get jobs over Australians. And I presume they mean in Australia. And then, as my brain is wont to do, after those two articles, I found another article on page 7 on the 20th of August. And the headline read, Long Week Dead Worrying. Working longer hours, this is a quote, working longer hours is killing us, with new research revealing a 55-hour week is linked to a 33% greater risk of stroke and a 13% increased risk of coronary heart disease compared to working a normal 35 to 40-hour week. And that's the end of the quote. Now, I don't know whether you take those figures seriously or not, but I've just found it interesting that when we're talking about other people coming and taking over our jobs. My take on all this is, I recall many years ago a Chinese general at a meeting stating that he couldn't understand why other countries would want a free trade agreement with them, as they would destroy any country because of the wage differential. Now, remembering our people attacking Chinese here in Australia because they knew the truth 100 years ago of this Chinese general statement, and they knew our wages and conditions would be destroyed without a white Australia policy. Now, that probably sounds a bit controversial to people, Ethan, but they had a fair idea of what would happen. And I know from my little experience in the bush that there are huge areas of cotton farms, the sugar industry in Queensland, the Chinese, I think they had citrus industries up in Central Emerald or somewhere like that. The Chinese are buying up huge areas of Australia and developing it for agriculture, etc. So this is, to me, it's not all one way, as if Abbott's making out, it's just a win-win for us. No, I don't think it is. I think we're going to lose their sovereignty. But anyway, I'll see what you have.
Well, that's exactly right, Lindsay. It is takeover just on a subtle level. You know, it's these free trade agreements, the key word is free there, and free means the destruction of sovereignty. Because, you know, think of the TPP and all of this stuff. Abbott doesn't want to mention in the China Free Trade Agreement that it's a miniature version of the TPP where the Chinese government can sue the Australian government if we interrupt their profit. It's been all over on 60 Minutes and Sunday Night, all of these stories on the TV about farmers that are unfortunately, you know, committing suicide and whatnot because of these Chinese investors that are being allowed to come in, that are being allowed to all of our agriculture and all of our farming is just being bought up and taken over and sold off while we get the crap from the imports that we have, you know, and it's destroying our country. So when you say about the general statement, you know, it's only a controversial thing to say about a wider Australia policy and about how that has been eroded if people are believing the mainstream media, you know, because it's hard to argue against it, because the China Free Trade Agreement is as great as Abbott makes it sound, Johnno. They don't want to discuss the negatives, and the negatives are that this country, with little sovereignty, whatever that word means, whatever sovereignty we have left, it's completely being sold off to China and overseas interests every day.
Well, there's a few issues here, so we should make them distinct. The first one is to do with the free trade agreement. Now, it's common sense that if you're trying to compete with people who have lower standards of work than we have, then you're going to have to reduce your standards of work as well. So if we have a 38-hour week where certain minimum standards are expected, but those people are competing with someone in the country where they don't have those standards, then it is obvious and natural that either you're going to lose or you're going to reduce your standards. Those are the only two logical outcomes. And so once upon a time, we had trade barriers and we had tariffs to say, hey, this isn't a level playing field. So to help our own jobs, to help our own economy, we're going to say, if you want to import stuff from a country without those standards, fine, you're going to have to pay more. Now, if you go to a commerce degree at a university in Australia today, and no doubt around the world, you'll be told, no, you can't have trade barriers and tariffs. That's the government interfering with the market. That's bad for the people. That's bad for the nation. They teach it as neoliberalism. They teach it this is good economic theory. So right now, people who've done well at school, they want to go and learn commerce. They want to go and learn accounting and finance and all of these things. Oftentimes, the most intelligent minds of their generation or their cohort, they go off to do these commerce degrees. And what are they indoctrinated with? The government must not interfere with the market. That's bad for you. That's bad for the country. But of course, what that leads to is, well, then we, the people, are going to be competing with countries that don't have the standards that we have, but they don't teach that far. So now if you talk to somebody who's done a commerce degree at university, invariably they're going to tell you that trade barriers are bad. Anyone who says otherwise is from a different era who just didn't understand economics. And if you want the government to stop other people from importing things that don't have our standards, then you're a statist, you're the bad guy. That's what they're indoctrinated with. Now, if you can't see the problem with that, then I can't help it. And I can tell you that's what they're teaching, because that's one of the things that I studied when I was at university. I know what they're teaching, and that's what they're indoctrinating people with. And I hear people arguing this all the time. You can't have trade barriers. You need to reduce trade barriers. That's going to help us. And I say, how much has it helped us over the last 70 years? How much has it helped us? You know, once upon a time, a single income was enough to support a family, the husband and the wife and the children, get them through school, pay for a house, buy a car. Everything was fine. Now, this is one of many changes, so you can't pin it all on the reduction of trade barriers, but there's no doubt in my mind it has harmed Australia to reduce trade barriers for the simple reason that you reduce the trade barriers and now you're competing with people who don't have the standards that we expect, Lindsay. It's that simple.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I can remember reading a book, and I don't know where I'm going to lay my hands on it now, but back in the 1800s, they had this same philosophy and it was squashed. So it's just what's happening now is those people have now come to the surface and now they're reinflicting their philosophy on us again. They tried it once before, and now they're coming back at it again.
And it's the same thing that happened with manufacturing.
Yeah.
With the Lima Declaration signed in 1975. This country, they made an agreement to redistribute manufacturing to developing countries and whatnot, and that's the exact same thing that happened. It was a subtle sort of takeover where our domestic industry was destroyed, and they've tried to continue that on. And they've stated the goal that they want to have. It's the exact same thing that's happening with these free trade agreements. It's just eroding the so-called sovereignty that we do have, eroding our domestic growth and our products, and it's selling it off. And Johnno summed it up completely well. People don't see that far down because they're not taught that. It's the same with accounting. Money's printed out of thin air. Move on. People aren't being taught that, so people don't understand this. And when you've got the so-called leader of our country coming out on television, coming out in press conferences and telling us how great this is, you better believe, Johnno, that the people will accept it.
And things are changing rapidly. When I was born in 1987, there was 16 million people in Australia. And at the time, we had 4 car manufacturing companies. This is just one example, but it's a good one. We had Ford, Holden, Toyota, and Mitsubishi, all manufacturing cars in this country, specifically for the domestic market with some exports as well. But it was the domestic market that was able to support this. So in my short lifetime, I'm only 27, in my short lifetime, they've been able to take it from 4 manufacturing companies. Ford's gone, Holden's gone, Mitsubishi's gone. The last I heard, Toyota was still making cars, but for how much longer? And that was the last time I checked. For all I know, they've closed it now as well in my short lifetime. And like I said, the children who've gone to university and been taught about economics and about commerce, they're being taught this is a good thing because Australia doesn't have a comparative advantage in manufacturing. It's good that we've lost manufacturing because that was a burden on our economy in the first place. It required too many government subsidies, what have you. That's a good thing. And then you say, okay, what have we replaced it with? What have we replaced those jobs with? Service economy jobs, just wage slave jobs. And for what? And that only works when the times are good. What happens when the times are bad? If you're not manufacturing anything, what are you doing? You have to import it all. So what are you trading with? And yet, I'm telling you right now, our most intelligent, educated people believe that what's happening is good. I've used the word before. I'll keep using it. It is indoctrination. It's a doctrine. It's a doctrine that doesn't help us, Lindsay.
No, I agree with you. And when Ethan was talking about the Lima Agreement, I can remember going through the parliamentary records at that stage, and there were even Labor men giving speeches at the time saying, yes, we know that we're going to lose manufacturing jobs, but that's just the burden that our people are going to have to put up with because we've got to help the third world. Well, they're supposed to be our representatives, not Africa or Asia's representatives. That was my view on it. I remember thinking, are you telling these people that? You're saying it in Parliament where they can't hear. Are you doing that on the shop floor, telling them that the jobs have got to go?
Well, did you read out the quote from Latham's diaries? Did you read that part out? Because I went through your agenda, and one of the articles mentioned Latham's diaries. Now, Mark Latham was the Labor leader, so the opposition leader 10 years ago now. When he left office, he wrote his memoirs, which, even though they didn't go into much depth about the real truth of how the world works, it did go into the truth about how political parties works. And he was saying then that at the time, the man who is now the opposition leader and possibly our next prime minister, back then he was a trade union leader. And he would say in private, of course we're going to bring down rights. We have to. That's what we're going to do. But we're going to tell our people, our union members, the complete opposite. We have to say one thing to our union members, but do the complete opposite in reality. And this was all exposed 10 years ago. And yet right now, who's leading the polls to win the next election? That same man, Bill Shorten. So this isn't even a secret. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is all out in the open. But the regular peasants, the regular masses who trust their TV, trust their news, trust their education systems, completely oblivious because of that trust that they have in the TV, in the education institutions. It's that simple. They can even state in their own books, hey, the guy who's going to be your next prime minister, he doesn't give a stuff about your rights. He doesn't give a stuff about your working conditions. He's selling you down the river. He'll do it openly. The peasants know, they've got no idea, Lindsay. They're clueless.
I agree with you entirely. I just can't remember what article. It may come up later anyway. I might refer to it. I'll see. But no, I agree with you. And it's been this whole concept. That's why I brought that up to begin with. There's so many things in this that are just not right. And like you're saying, we just gloss over it. And for the peasants, we trust the people who come out of universities to know better than we do because it's beyond us. And like you're saying, they're being brainwashed as well. But it's not just economists or whatever. There are a whole range of people who come out of universities who's been brainwashed, school teachers, the whole lot.
And I think one of the problems is that people either don't set foot in university and don't know what's being passed off as the truth, or people go to university and believe it as the truth. And that's the whole idea, to build you up. Hey, you're smart. You studied commerce. You know what we know now. If someone tells you that trade barrier is a good thing, you know better. You went to university.
Yeah.
We taught you.
Yeah.
So people have either been in university and become indoctrinated, or they don't know what's being passed off as truth. Very few people are going to uni and saying, hold on, this is all bullshit. And then coming out and saying it the way that I'm doing right now. But I can tell you, if you haven't set foot in university, you have to understand this is being passed off, not as just as the truth, but as the solid truth. And anyone who says otherwise is from a bygone era, and we're doing so much better now. In the live chat, someone asked, well, if there was 16, 17 million people when you were born, Johnno, how many people are there now? Like 24 million people. So a population of 16 to 17 million could support 4 car manufacturing companies, but a population of 23, 24 million people can't. 2 big issues here. Why is the country growing so fast in the first place? Another topic for another day, we've covered it in the past. But secondly, how is it? Now, they'll come back, the indoctrinated people come back and say, oh, but those car manufacturing companies could only survive because they're being propped up by their government. Well, what do you think is happening in the other countries? Their car manufacturing is being propped up by the government. And then people say, oh, so you want the government to waste their money on propping up this industry? Well, for starters, where's that money coming from? It's all make-believe. Our government could print the money if they wanted to. The only reason why they don't is because that's how the whole financial system works. They have to borrow money from the bond markets. Now, we're getting into a couple of other side issues at the moment, but the point is, what's happening today doesn't help the people. And these free trade agreements, there's a reason why they've got so much propaganda in the media trying to make people believe it's good, because at a basic instinctive level, we know it's not. It's only through indoctrination that we would ever believe otherwise.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely with you. Yeah. I don't know. Have you got anything more to say about it?
No, I think it's been summed up pretty well, gentlemen.
Well, we need to move on to the 5th topic for domestic, and it's to do with more propaganda. This time, the Murdoch papers pushing blatant cultural Marxism. Lindsay.
Okay, me again. This is on page 3 of the Courier Mail. Everything. Oh, no, I shouldn't say everything from the Courier Mail because I've got a few other things. This is on the 17th of August. The headline read, "New dads urged to stay home." And I'll quote, "New dads are being urged to take parental leave, with gender equity advocates declaring it critical to closing the pay gap between men and women. With Australian women earning about 18% less than their male colleagues, Diversity Council of Australia Chief Executive Lisa Annes said men must take paternity leave if the pay gap is to be narrowed. The road to equality is littered with men taking parental leave," Ms. Annes said. Now, my take on this was, that seems the most unfortunate choice of words for her, if women are hoping to lure men to adopt this philosophy. How or why would this work? I can't follow why men taking parental leave would narrow the gap. That was my take on it. Can you see it? Or can you?
I really can't coax the connections between.
No, that's what I couldn't understand. But to say that, you know, the road to equality is littered with men, that straight away, that's going to get my back up for a start. So I presume it will others. I'm just not sure what they were aiming to get at there. Anyway, I'll go on to the next one, the next story which is associated with this, and we can perhaps discuss it. This is in the Courier Mail on page 4 on the 16th of August, which is the day before that previous quote. And the headlines read, "Why working girls make better mums." And quote, "Mums overwhelmingly agree that working has a positive impact on their kids, parenting and families. Social Services Minister Scott Morrison has seized on the research to argue the Abbott government should target more assistance to helping mums re-enter the workforce with childcare support. Working mother of 2, Nicole Grant, said she was glad she worked, but she always prioritised her children, Emily 8 and Laura 6. However, she said it was a constant struggle to make family life fit with her make her working life fit with her family life. And at times she was forced to miss some family occasions," end of quote. Now, my first question is, was this headline accidental or was it intended? And that headline is, "Why working girls make better mums." Now, the term working girls has another connotation, and the Courier Mail do this sort of thing all the time. Now, I don't know whether that one was intended or not, but it sort of upset me at the time. After all, our women are all shiksas, according to Jews. And if you don't know what that is, do a Google search. Why would Rupert, who's the Jew, not also hold and express this opinion in his newspapers? So I'm a little bit worried that this was like a Marxist thing about we need women to get out and work in the workforce. It's better for the families, better for the kids, all that sort of thing. But then at the same time, they're putting in that, well, why working girls make better mums. Now, the working girls is always referred to prostitutes whenever I've read it. So do you have a comment on that, Ethan, or not?
Well, there's a couple of things to touch on there. You know, the first article, you know it's a load of rubbish, because when you actually look into it, everyone knows that the pay gap is almost non-existent when you do it. Even the people that do the reports have said that it's not that. It's based on this and that. It's based on average the end wages, etc., etc. And when you eliminate that, it's people working longer hours and the women and all of this that has just been programmed into the people to believe that there was a pay gap. And I'm a writer outside of the show. That's what I do for a living. And one project that I got assigned to was to do a report about the pay gap in Australia and add recommendations on how we can fix it and whatnot. And that was when I discovered that it was just all a load of BS. You know, at that time, even I was indoctrinated to believing it. You know, this would have been five years ago or so. Even I was indoctrinated to believing that there was a pay gap, that this thing that was happening. So it's an ongoing process. And with the second article, you know, she said it right there. It's hard to balance working life with family life, and that right there, you know, we Lisa from the Sunshine Coast was here for an episode of Sunday Sessions with John LeBon. Her and her partner Alan were here, and she was talking from experience, saying, you know, it's of course there's going to be that sort of division, because that's what they want. They want to destroy the family units, and we could go, and we've discussed this multiple times on the show. But the way that the Courier Mail just keep reporting on it and do some of these confusing sort of titles and confusing sort of stories. I don't know what it's for. You know, George Orwell said that it's because that language is going to be transformed into a way that people just get so confused by it that they're not going to pay attention to it. But it's certainly a lot of issues there, Johnno, so I'll throw it over.
Well, the main one is you've got two articles there, one after the other. One saying that it's good that men are staying home and they should be taking time off work to look after the children. And then the next one saying, and it's good that women are working while they're having children. So that's a complete reversal of what used to be the standard model of a family, where the man would go out to work and the woman would look after children. And of course, today it's controversial to even talk about that. What you believe in, those old gender stereotypes, whatever, this is what we call cultural Marxism. Once upon a time, the family unit worked. Now the most demonized time, if you study the school today in Australia, the time that they'll demonize the most, those evil 1950s, when the men went off to work, the women looked after the children, and everything was terrible. That was the worst time. And people are being taught now, anyone who still believes that's a good family model, where the father works and the mother looks after children, they're sexist, they're misogynist, they're old-fashioned, they're stupid, they're uneducated, they're all kinds of horrible things. We don't want that. Now you have to ask, why would they want to break up the family model the way that they have? Well, there's a number of benefits that the cultural Marxists get from this. Firstly, they're destroying the culture of the people they're trying to destroy. That's obvious. We've touched on that before. Also, they're getting more people into the workforce, which means more people to tax. It also means that there's less people to look after children, which means that school and TV will become bigger influences on their lives. There's a whole number of factors they benefit from. The people who don't benefit are everybody else, you and me. And one of the reasons why house prices in Australia rocketed throughout the 1990s was because all of a sudden you had two people were going onto the mortgage, they could afford to take a greater loan. But then what happens? Everyone else has to do the same thing. So now we're in a position where for someone to buy a house anywhere near the city, they need two incomes, whereas once upon a time, they only needed one. Now, how is the average person benefiting from this? They're not. The people who are benefiting are the usual suspects. It's always the same people behind all this stuff. It doesn't help us. And this is Cultural Marxism 101. And here we've got the Murdoch paper pushing in two separate articles in 2 separate days. Yay for women working, and yay for men stopping working to look after the children. It's so obvious to me what they're doing, Ethan. And I do speak to people about these kinds of things. And generally, again, instinctively people know this is nonsense, but the indoctrination is so strong and the political correctness is so strong. They don't want to be seen as sexist. They don't want to be seen as misogynistic. So, hey, even those people who can see the problem with this, they don't speak out about it for fear of being ostracized, Ethan.
That's right, and I can attest to that too from my interactions as well. And again, it comes a lot of people that do believe in these things as well are also misguided. They don't even know what they believe in. You know what I mean? A lot of, like, it's the same with feminism. People believe that that's equal rights when you look at it, and it's not there's no representation for either genders, and you can break that down too. I was more concerned with the wording of the articles and why, the first article is all based on the pay gap, which is a load of nonsense. The second one is about, it just proves in the article there that life has become much more difficult because of working. But yeah, John is completely right. The overall arching the practice, I was going to say theory, but it's a practice that has been it's been carried out over the 20th century here in Australia, particularly. It's exactly what John said. It's been carried out, and these are just perfect examples of that, Lindsay.
Yeah. No. Well, I haven't got much to add to it. I think that speaks for itself. But I think the other thing was only an afterthought. This business about working girls, that upset me as well, because I thought these bastards know what they're doing, and they're just running. They're running our women down, and they're laughing at us because we don't understand what they've just said or whatever. That's the other thing that upsets me. Anyway, that's enough said there.
Well, and once again, I say this, you've either been to university and you've been indoctrinated, or you haven't been to university and you don't know what they're indoctrinating the young people with. And is it any wonder that young people are so confused about the world when they're being trained to believe that the family model of the man going to work, the woman staying home and nurturing the children, that's a bad thing? Can you blame people for being utterly confused about the world around them when they're trained such utter nonsense? We could talk about this all day. We need to move on to the sixth and final topic for domestic. And this is an update on Australia's involvement against the Islamic State, Ethan.
Yeah, thanks, Johnno. This will just be a quick one. I've got an article in front of me from 9 News from August 21st, which is titled, Abbott confirms US has asked Australia to expand its fight against Islamic State. Quote, Prime Minister Tony Abbott has confirmed Australia has received a formal request from the US to extend airstrikes on Islamic State targets into Syria. The federal government will carefully consider the request from the Pentagon and make a decision in the next couple of weeks, Mr. Abbott said. The decision would take into account the laws about conducting airstrikes in Syria, which differ to those about strikes in Iraq, Mr. Abbott told reporters in Perth. While there is a little difference between the legalities of airstrikes on either side of the border, there's no difference in morality. This is an evil movement, whether it's operating in Iraq or in Syria. And we said that at the start of this show when we started it. What's going to happen? They're going to trickle into Syria and then that border will become irrelevant. But continue on. In the end, when they don't respect the border, the question is, why should we? This is quotes from Abbott. Yeah. Mr. Abbott said the decision will be taken very seriously and that other nations were also considering their involvement. Quote, this is a movement of almost incalculable, unfathomable evil. And it's very important that Australia plays its part in the campaign to disrupt, degrade, and ultimately destroy this death cult, he said, end quote. So there you have it, Australia confirming that we have received a request from the US. Last week we spoke that it was just an idea that was floating around in Parliament. Now, a week later, we've received an official request just in the space of a week, and we've seen it gone from one extreme to the other. Now, it's quite obvious where we all stand on the issue. We spoke about it last week. So I don't want to focus too much on that. The thing I wanted to focus on in the discussion, and if people remember me saying this, was how the media plants the seeds beforehand to ease certain agendas to the public when they're released. You always see, and John has pointed this out many times on the show, the words considering or in the works or propositions. And they use these terms so they can get away with saying that something's on the way, whilst making it still a pondering scenario in their head. So, Lindsay, I know you're also quite familiar with this after seeing it in the Courier Mail every week, almost all the time. You can really get to a point where you can coax the connections fairly easily now because they put it right in front of your eyes, Lindsay.
Yeah. I remember, maybe it was last week or the week before, there was an article saying Obama, and I can't remember the exact wording, so I don't want to, but it was something like Obama requests or demands or something like that. That we do this, and I remember it straight away the hairs on the back of my neck went up because I thought, who's this bastard to be telling us what we will and won't do? But then that's no different to George Bush Senior when he came out here and he stood on the airport in Sydney and said, you will do, and laid the law down to our people. I remember I was absolutely shocked, but he was only just being honest. That's the way it is, isn't it? We're just we just do as we're told.
And now we have Tony Abbott saying that it's an inconceivable, unfathomable death cult. These are the words he's using in these speeches. And it doesn't matter what your stance is on Syria, what there is an agenda at hand here, and that's what you need to identify, is that this is just and to put these articles in perspective, to show the people that might be new to this show or not understand that they tell you what they're going to do. The agenda's already been there. The game is rigged. The game is fixed. Whatever their agenda is has already been set in stone, and it's just about easing it to the public from here on out, Johnno.
Yeah, indeed. And look, I want to take this conversation a little bit further. When we're reading these articles about a war in Syria, I think it's worth questioning how much we actually know about what's happening in Syria. They might be saying, well, we're sending more troops, we're doing this, we're doing that. That's what we have in a newspaper article or on the 7 o'clock news or what have you. How much evidence do we really have? And if you read George Orwell's 1984, one of the things that the propagandists do is constantly talk about wars that aren't even really happening, but there's something to keep the public occupied. People either support the war or against the war. But is the war really going on? How much evidence do we really have? And then you look at Bashar al-Assad or the former leader of Iran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, or these people who are presented to us as enemies. But you have to question, are they really enemies of the people who rule the world, or are they just agents of the people who rule the world? And whilst I agree with you, if it's true that there's a war going on in Syria and we're sending people, that's ridiculous. We should also question how much truth is actually in the article in the first place.
Yeah, well, what the main point that I wanted to focus on, because we did discuss this last week, whether we believe it's real or not. I said that I do believe that this is real. This is a real thing that's happening. The point that I wanted to focus on was the agenda. So on one extreme, if the war is real, then the agenda's already been set out. We're going to bomb Syria. These terrorists are going to go into, our funded extremists are going to be sent into Syria to take it down. We're going to use that as justification to bomb Syria. On the B side, the war is all fake. None of this exists. But then again, it's fear-based trauma. It's telling you that this is happening. It's telling that ISIS is flooding the Middle East. It's getting stronger. It's getting bigger. So it doesn't matter where you stand, whether you believe it's real or not. There's an agenda somewhere at hand. And this article, within the space of 1 week, going from it being a thought in the air to Obama demanding we do it.
And not only that, but Osama bin Laden's son
is on board. That's exactly right. And just in the space of a week, this happening, no matter which side of the fence you sit on, John, it just shows that the agenda's already been played out. The agenda's already been written, and they're just going to go and do whatever they want from here. It's just about conditioning the public to accept it easily.
That's what it is. It's propaganda, and either the war is real and our involvement in it is ridiculous, or the war that they're portraying through the media is make-believe and they're trying to distract us. But either way, it's complete nonsense.
Yeah.
Now, we'll need to move on to the international segment. It's a nice little segue. The first topic for international, Lindsay, is to do with US rabbis supporting the Iran deal.
Yeah. First of all, it comes from Times of Israel website. That's where I got it. And it was on the 17th of August, and the headline said just that: 340 US rabbis sign letter supporting Iran deal. And I'll just read the quotes. As rabbis, we support the agreement. The letter begins, signed by 340 rabbis from all streams of Judaism, many of them identified with progressive causes. The letter was published Monday by the left-wing Zionist group, and I won't try to pronounce it, AMEINU, which says it promotes, quote, a progressive Israel and a just America, end of quote. The nuclear deal signed last month between 6 world powers and Iran aimed to curtail Tehran's nuclear program in exchange for easing severe international sanctions. It is coming up for a critical vote of support in Congress in late September, when the Republican majority has vowed to vote against the deal. The Obama administration promised to veto legislation that undermines the deal and is campaigning to garner the support of enough lawmakers to prevent a 2/3 vote overcoming that veto. Now, the reason I brought it up is I usually am dumping on things Israeli and Jewish and what have you, and I'm probably well renowned for that. And I saw this and I thought, well, that's somewhat positive. I'll give them a positive spin for a change. But as well as that, I just found it interesting to get something that's slightly different from the usual Netanyahu bomb all the non-Jews, that sort of thing. So to me, it was sort of positive thing, Ethan, and I don't know how your take is on this. Do you have anything specific to think about that?
Yeah, I see that again as a positive thing. Everyone just needs to read press TV to understand how anti-Israel Iran is, and the coverage that they do is fantastic coverage, just exposing these Zionist interests. So if this is real, if this is real that these people are supporting the deal, I don't know if the deal itself is a positive thing or not. It goes into a much larger discussion, but just that there are Zionists out there, if it is real, that are going against the grain, that are going against the state and what the state wants, you can see that as a positive, whether it's real or not, Johnno.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing that took my interest with this article was the number of rabbis who supposedly signed the deal, Lindsay. It was 340, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Which is an interesting number. It wasn't 620. It wasn't 241. It was 340. And this is another one of those articles where I find myself thinking, how much proof do I have that any of this story is even real to begin with? And then we're talking about the Iran nuclear deal. So again, you get to the issue of, well, I can, if I want to, believe that Iran are actually opposed to the rest of the world order agenda, if I want to believe that. Or I can look at the evidence and say, what evidence do I actually have to prove that's real? Again, I come back to George Orwell. You think about the farms. All of the farms have farmers at the top who are milking the animals. And they're all a little group together. That's just the way that it is. Why would we think, and that was George Orwell writing that, why would we assume that there are actually leaders, again, the Iranian leader, the new one, his name escapes me. Again, come back to the Syrian one, Bashar al-Assad. Why would we simply believe that these guys are actually enemies to the rest of the ruling world order? So the particular article I find interesting. If we take it on face value, fascinating, but I'm not going to take that one on face value.
Mm-hmm. No, that's fair enough. I have no proof, and like once again we say it comes out of the times of Israel, so you wouldn't know whether there was something there as well. But anyway, I just thought I'd bring it up to let people know it exists, and that was it.
Well, even if it's not a real story or something, Lindsay, you gave praise to Zionist interests here on the show. It's a world first. So I think we're making progress with this show, Johnno.
Progress indeed. The second topic for International today is to do with World Bank critics being attacked and jailed, Ethan.
Thanks, Johnno. Now, this is a feature piece by myself, so I'll be reading out a lot here. So I apologize in advance if my voice gets a bit repetitive and stale, but this piece I'm about to do right here came to light after reading a report by the Human Rights Watch entitled "At Your Own Risk: Reprisals Against Critics of World Bank Group Projects." Now, this report, which I'll expand on in a second, was really something that interests me recently, and it reveals, although the World Bank and many of the companies that invest in have, quote, policies that require them to consult communities and safeguard against causing harm to those and the environment through their investments, in reality, this often adds up to very little when communities come under attack. So that's the premise of what this report is stating. So with that in mind, I'll expand on it. The organization in this report says that, quote, people in Cambodia, India, Uganda, Uzbekistan, and elsewhere have faced reprisals from governments and powerful companies for criticizing projects financed by the World Bank and the IFC, which failed to respond meaningfully to abuses that made a mockery of their own stated committees to participation and accountability. The World Bank Group has failed to even take appropriate action when people have suffered reprisals, specifically because they were involved in bringing human rights concerns to the attention of group officials, end quote. Through the World Bank, though the World Bank says it spoke out against some of these abuses and attempted to seek compensation for the victims, their claims are contradicted by their subsequent choice to enable the perpetrators. So for those who don't understand, for example, think of the case of a human rights group that attempted to take an abuse case to the bank's group's inspection panel, only to find out that 1 week later, the panel's interpreter was thrown in prison and possibly tortured. This is what it is. This is the standards that are being here. So the report continues, quote, in one case, weeks after the World Bank's inspection panel concluded its process, government security forces threw the panel's interpreter into prison. Bank officials have told Human Rights Watch that they have questioned government officials about the arrest and highlighted their concerns behind closed doors. But weeks after the arrest, the bank provided a new loan to the government the interpreter remains behind bars at a notorious detention facility known for its use of torture. The group has not, however, taken any steps to check on the well-being of those interviewed in the course of their investigation beyond discussing security concerns with complainants' representatives, end quote. So this is all coming directly from the human rights group and their report. I'm just reading out their findings, what they found through their investigations. So just think about that. Think about the magnitude of that as I continue. The report explains 2 key case studies, which I won't get into now because it will take too long, and also information that critics of a number of World Bank Group finance projects have faced numerous risks, regardless of how they chose to raise their concerns. So whatever the project was, regardless of whether it was legal or blockade or anything, they've been stonewalled. Quote, in repressive environments, the World Bank Group has often closed its eyes to the risk of abuse rather than engage in difficult conversations with partner governments, end quote. However, the report notes this has not always been the case, but Human Rights Watch points to the case in Chad in 2001 where an opposition leader who had spoken to the group's inspector panel was arrested. In response, the former World Bank president, James Wolfensong, fought to have him freed. The World Bank has also spoke out against Cambodia's violent crackdown. So it's giving you examples of sometimes the World Bank Group is good, but not really. The abuse of government power against critics takes several forms, but all overlapped around an attempt to, quote, silence independent voices that are critical of governments in the developmental area. These abuse measures can prevent people from participating in decisions about development, from publicly opposing development initiatives that may harm their livelihoods or violate their rights, and from complaining about developmental issues that are ineffective, harmful, and otherwise wrong, end quote. Now, I've got a list here of what the abuses include. It includes, obviously, laws which criminalize expression. They can be criminal defamation or national security laws as the justification for this. These are preventing the formation of organized civil groups in these third world countries to do something. Direct violence against journalists and human rights advocates. This one is fairly clear cut. It's been noted in the report that 61 journalists and at least 116 environmental activists were murdered in 2014 in these countries. And it just continues on, and it's a long one. And I'll put links at AusRoundtable.com because, you know, I've been speaking for a while here for you to go and look at the information yourself, read the report. But in summary, and I want to thank the listeners for listening to my voice, for those who found it hard to follow what I was saying, the report concludes the following. Government or company officials have intimidated or harassed critics of the World Bank Group finance projects, threatened them with physical assault, death, and baseless criminal charges, and then placed them under surveillance. In other cases, government and company officials have threatened critics' livelihoods, including by threatening to terminate employment, cutting off benefits, or increasing the workload. And this is what this report, Lindsay, has revealed. So I did a piece on tottnews.com. It was the end of last year before we started this show, and it was to do with Westpac and the major 4 banks in this country sponsoring child labor and state enforced home evictions and land grabs overseas. And now to come out again and see that the World Bank is their finance projects, just any measure of response against them is being crushed, similar as what they're going to try to bring in here through legislation. It really was something that I really wanted to speak about, because this is what's happening in these countries. And I don't know if you've had any experience or knowledge with, you know, banks doing these sort of things with their funded projects. So if there's anything you want to expand upon from what I read out, then. No. It was interesting to me. I've heard sort of a whiff of this from other places. I think even that woman, starts with an H, used to work with the World Bank. She blew the lid on them. Oh, yeah, I know the one you're talking about. Yeah. I think she was even referring to some of this at one stage. But when you were going through it, it reminded me almost exactly what you were just saying before about the Abbott government and the environmentalists. It's almost identical sort of stuff. It's nothing to do with the World Bank, but it's almost the same behavior. Yeah, and that's why I thought I'd bring it up in the show, because I put those connections together like that, and didn't really have anything to expand upon that. I just wanted to reveal the information to reveal this report, and I'll leave it at AusRoundtable.com. But yeah, that's the first thing that I thought of.
Yeah.
There's people out there that are in these impoverished countries that these corporations just sponsor their projects in, whether it be farming or whatnot, and they're going in, and anyone that tries to organize a civil group or organize something is being, the interpreters are being thrown in jail, journalists are being arrested and murdered, and all of this stuff is, and the World Bank are complacent in this. Westpac, ANZ, Suncorp, NAB, we're all complacent in this because they do similar things as well. And the thing that I have realized, Johnno, when I've been speaking to people on the streets about this, I brought up the Westpac thing a long time ago, was people somewhat can identify with their money going to sponsor these things. So I see that as a good way to breach the barrier between trying to tell people that banks are not good for them. And I'm interested to get your perspective on the people that, you know, if you try to tell them in a way that the money that they're having in banks, the fees that they're paying, the interest that they're paying is going to these state-sponsored projects, would it have an effect on them?
Well, we're talking about the World Bank. How many people in Australia know anything about the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank? How many people know the first thing about it? Very few. How many people know the first thing about how banking is actually done? How many people know anything about the term usury and what usury used to be considered? How many people really have the first idea what money is and how it works and how it's used to enslave them? The answer is very few. And most people, especially when they're young, they believe that the education system is here to help them, to inform them, to let them know, to make them know the things that they need to know. But if you can go through a 13-year education and not understand the first thing about what money really is and where it really comes from, then clearly that education isn't to help you. It's so obvious to me now, but I do remember a time when I still believed that the education system was flawed, but it was here to help me. Of course, I'm on the other side now, and I completely understand it's not here to help us whatsoever. And when you talk about the World Bank, it's got the word bank in it. What is a bank? How many people know what a bank is? The answer is very, very few. And how many people are willing to do the research to learn about all of these things? Very few. The reality is that if you're willing to let people control money and control you and your family and your entire country through money, if you let them do that, they will do that. And that's what's being done today. And we hear about the evils of the World Bank in third world countries and lending money, expecting back all of this interest. And once upon a time, I used to think, man, it's terrible that the World Bank and the IMF would do this. It is. What I didn't realize is they're doing it to us. We have to borrow our money from the international monetary markets as well, from the bond markets, what have you. We're paying something like $1 billion per year, Australian dollars, in interest just on the debt. But who is the debt to? It's all make-believe, you see. So they're using this as parasites. And once again, Lindsay, it's the usual suspects.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. What Ethan was getting at, it just sort of came to me a few seconds ago. The belief that I used to have as a youngster was that, yes, they're going in and they're making life better for the people in these downtrodden countries. But then it was only later on I realized that, no, they're not. What they're doing is they're going in, and quite often they're doing cash crops. And to do the cash crop, they've got to put in a dam or whatever. They take all of those little people's land away from them. And I think that's the thing we're trying to get at. So it's not helping the country, it's helping individuals with a cash crop, and those individuals are quite often foreign corporations or Bechtel or somebody that's
And as this report reveals, anyone that tries to oppose that in these countries has been kidnapped, thrown in jail, murdered. You know, it's all documented here. And for the World Bank, these banks, it's not just you that we're thinking of, Lindsay. They have it in their codes of conduct and their mission statements and their vision statements to the world, is to go into these countries and help impoverish them. So when you see that they're not doing that, that not only are they destroying what's happening in these countries, Westpac, ANZ, all these banks take land grabs, child labor, forced evictions, all through Cambodia and all of these countries. You can see that they're contradicting themselves right there, and that's it's hard to convince a lot of people that money is just, there's no difference between monopoly money and the money you have in your hand. But I've realized when talking to people and saying, hang on, you with Westpac, are you? You know that Westpac is forcing evictions, and it's all coming from, your interest in your GST is funding all of these projects in these countries. And it's a way that they step back and go, well, that's terrible. You know what I mean? And I see it as a way to breach it, but obviously I need to expand upon this a lot more. So I'll probably do a report for tottnews.com or something like that to update people. And as always, I'll leave links at ausroundtable.com. But I wanted to get the most important parts out and introduce it to a side of the truth movement that might not have seen it, because a lot of people don't realize that banks are doing these things. A lot of people don't realize that corporate interests and groups have their parent company, Rupert Murdoch in education. A lot of people don't realize these things. Yeah. So for me to bring it up on the show, that's all I wanted to do, because it's all about information, Johnno, and it's all about people receiving the information and doing what they will with it.
Yeah, and at the risk of getting tangential, one of the points that we've constantly made is that people have to do their own research. If they just sit here and listen to us say the monetary system is used against us, the financial system is used against us, money isn't what you think it is, we're financial slaves. If people just hear us and just nod their head and agree, what difference does it make? If you're not actually doing the research for yourself to fully understand exactly what we're talking about here, the scale of the corruption that's fundamental to this system, then you're not helping yourself, and you won't be able to teach or share this information with other people. If you want to share information with people, if that's what your goal is, you need to have done the research for yourself. So again, we'll provide links to all of this at ausroundtable.com, AWST so people can follow those links and hopefully go and find other links as well. Find your own opinion. This isn't something you can do in 10 or 20 minutes. I don't even think it's something you can do in 10 or 20 hours. It has to become a hobby. The truth, research, information has to become a hobby of yours, something you put lots of time into, because there's so much to learn, and not just that, so much deprogramming to do from what you were taught by the so-called education institutions. And how many people really think the truth is that important that I put that much time into it, Lindsay?
Yeah. And I agree with you here in that I don't even think it's 20, I think it's 20 years or more. And what I usually find in my own personal life was that you go out discussing something with somebody along these lines, and they'd come back with something that bamboozled you or baffled you, and you had no answer, and that forces you to go and do more research. And I think that's the only way to go. You've got to be learning the whole time, and as you get older, you've got to become more knowledgeable and smarter, and use that to be able to debate with people, so you don't get walked all over. A bit like you were talking before about the economists coming out of university. You've got to have a comeback. Somebody discussed this with me the other day about climate change. And he's fancied himself as a scientist, and the same thing. And luckily enough, I was to come back straight away with about the emails that had been sent about climate change, and straight away shut up. Whereas if I had not that sort of knowledge, then he would have just kept rolling on. So I urge people. I know I'm constantly being told, no, this is not a book reading age. This is a video watching age or whatever. But somewhere along the line, you've got to knuckle down, and you've got to be able to learn the details and absorb them for regurgitation when you're discussing it with other people. Anyway, that's enough for me now.
It all goes back. There's a book by Edward Bernays called Propaganda that I talk about constantly. You need to read that book. If you consider yourself a researcher, an independent thinker, a truther, whatever you consider yourself to be, if truth is important, you need to read the book Propaganda by Edward Bernays for two reasons. One is to understand how they think, how the people who control the minds think, the way that they see the world. But B is to learn their strategies and their tactics, so that if you want to fight against them in this information war, then you can use those same strategies and tactics to your own effect. And one of them is keeping concepts simple and repeating them. And sometimes people notice that I try to repeat some simple concepts often. Usury is evil. Usury is evil. Because usury is evil. And if I start getting to the technicalities of, well, if I lend you $100 and I force you to pay me back $105, then where do you get that other $5? Well, you've got that from somebody else that I lent the money to, because of course, all money isn't just an asset, it's also a debt. That's just basic accounting. If I start getting to all of this, too difficult for most people. It's all true, but it's too difficult. If I just stick to, well, usury is evil, they can then try and disagree with that and we can get into a conversation. But if they don't disagree with it, it's a simple concept. Usury is evil. It's financial enslavement. You are a debt slave. We're all debt slaves. Even the people who say to me, oh, but Johnno, I don't have a mortgage and I paid off my car loan. That's great, but they're taking taxes from your money, aren't they? Oh, yeah, but how do I get away from income tax? Well, I'm not saying that you can. What I'm saying is they're taking your money from income tax, and a lot of that goes to pay debt. So every person in this country today is a debt slave because this country is in so much debt. Again, usury is evil. Usury is slavery. Simple concepts, get the ideas out there. And that's one of the things that I try and do, Ethan.
That's exactly right, Johnno. And that's going back to the original. We went a bit off topic there, but going back to the original story, the same banks that are doing this, the same banks that are enslaving you as debt slaves, are also enslaving all of these countries, and their projects are doing this. So I encourage everyone to go to AusRoundtable.com to look at the information for themselves, read the report by the Human Rights, watch the Human Rights Group, and just go through it yourself, because it's not until you look at these reports that you realise that this stuff is going on. So I encourage everyone to do so.
In the live chat, Baby Bear says that I must be wrapped at North Melbourne's win over the Dockers today. I didn't watch the game because I was preparing for this show and doing the show, and that's one of the sacrifices that we make doing the show, isn't it? We have to miss out on our team finally winning a game, and the things that we do for the listeners, Ethan.
Everything always happens on a Sunday.
More than 50 live listeners. Thanks to all the good commenters posting good comments. I know it can be frustrating at times when you're dealing with some of the nonsense that goes on in there, but I've had to ban more than 30 accounts, Ethan. I'll keep on doing that. So if I seem a bit silent, you know why. I've got my hands full, but so far things are going well. We need to move on to the third segment for International, and that today is that polls suggest that Greeks think that Jews have too much power, Lindsay.
Yeah. This is an oldie, but I thought it was a goodie. It came from the Washington Free Beacon website on the 30th of June this year. And the headline said just that. Poll, 85% of Greeks believe the Jews have too much power over global finance. And I'll just read the quote straight off. A new poll by the Anti-Defamation League found that the majority of Greeks continue to hold anti-Semitic views about Jewish control over finance and the global economy, despite a recent drop in anti-Jewish attitudes in other parts of Europe. Greece, which faces the prospect of economic default at midnight on Wednesday, so that shows you the age of the article, surprises Iran and surpasses Iran and trails just slightly behind Turkey in the percentage of its residents who hold anti-Semitic views. In total, 67% of Greek respondents agreed with the majority of a list of anti-Semitic statements included in the survey. Other European countries, particularly France and Germany, have experienced a decrease in overall anti-Semitic attitudes in the wake of the recent attack on Jews. I'm not sure what that is. Would that be the Hebdo thing or in France or something? Yeah,
something like that.
Okay. According to the ADL poll, 90% of Greeks agreed with the statement that, quote, Jews have too much power in the business world, end of quote, and 85% agreed, quote, Jews have too much power in international finance markets, end of quote. In addition, 70% said that, quote, Jews still talk too much about what happened to them in the Holocaust, end of quote. And 51% said, quote, Jews don't care about what happens to anyone but their own kind, end of quote. And my little comment on this was that I consider those to be very high numbers compared to the US and Australia. Do we have to suffer some sort of turmoil before our people wake up to that level of understanding that the Greek people have got? And have you woken up yet, Ethan?
Well, I am a Greek, so I can attest to that. I do believe that there's too much power. Yeah. But that's just me, you know. I'm a crazy kook, conspiracy theorist, anti-Semite who should be imprisoned for that. That's an interesting article. You know, Greeks historically were the leaders of the free world, Johnno, as much as some people might like to deny that. No, that's interesting. I don't really have much to expand on it. You know, it is a positive article to speak about. If the polls and everything are legitimate, that the majority of Greeks aren't seen through the facade.
Well, in the live chat, justiceforgermans.com asked these anti-Semitic statements that the Greeks agreed with, were they simple facts? And of course, that is the case. If you point out that my entire life, the chairman of the Federal Reserve has been Jewish, people will say, well, that's anti-Semitic. Well, it's a fact. How is a fact anti-Semitic? Putting aside the question of what is a Semite in the first place, let's just go along with that nonsense for a moment. How is pointing out that Janet Yellen, current chairman, the one before her, Ben Bernanke, the one before him, Alan Greenspan, the last 26, 27 years, the Federal Reserve of the United States has been Jewish. That is not anti-Semitic. Now, you tell me, if the Jews who make up such a tiny percentage of the US population have made up 100% of the last 27 years of US Federal Reserve chairmanship, is that not the Jews having over-representative power when it comes to the monetary market? I mean, is that not evidence? How can that be construed as anti-Semitic?
Yeah, I agree with you. And you've mentioned a number of times on this show about the Australians and the number of the rich people in Australia and who they are, and the percentage that the Jews in Australia of the whole populations, it's supposed to be 2 or 3% or something like that. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. But yeah, and then suddenly like over 50% of the richest people in Australia are Jews. So you can't argue with that. I mean, if it's fact, it's fact.
That's exactly right. It's a fact, and it's more of a historical show. This, it's more of just stating what the facts are. You know what I mean? So we do state that all of our opinions are our own, but when we read out things like this, when we read out Netanyahu's own quotes, when we read out what's actually happening, it's just fact. You can't deny it. And the only people that are going to try to deny it are the people that have the wrong interests at hand, because you're just simply stating facts. And it is a fact that the Zionist interests are some of the most prevalent in the world, even though they make up 2-3% of populations in most countries.
Yeah, and the people who try and construe this as being anti-Semitic are also making the false assumption that just because some very high-profile figures are Jewish, that somehow we're trying to say that all the Jews are involved. Well, that's nonsense. Plenty of Jews in Australia have to take out mortgages just like the rest of us, have to pay back interest as financial slaves just like the rest of us. In my opinion, the majority of Jews are victims of this system, just like you and me and most of the people listening to this podcast. It just so happens that at the top rungs, in media, in banking, in finance, in the Federal Reserve itself, it just so happens that there's an over-representation of Jews. It also happens to be the case that in Australia, the majority of the wealthiest families in Australia, again, are Jewish. That is an issue, and it's an important issue, and it doesn't make you anti-Semitic to bring these up, just as it doesn't make you a Jew lover to point out that most Jews aren't involved in all of this. Yeah. They're victims just like you and me, Lindsay.
Yeah. And I think in the past I referred to that book, The Octopus, from 1940s, talking about the ownership of media then. And it was almost complete control way back then, So it's only gotten worse since then. Yeah. Anyway, I just get it irritates me this thing. Oh, you're anti-Semitic, because I get it all the time. And first of all, you got to ask them, what do you mean by the anti-Semitic? And then that sort of diffuses it. But we won't go on about it. But it's just interesting that there was the ADL that were doing that survey as well, because you've got to take that a little bit into account, because they like to beat it up. The whole world's coming to get us. Give us more money and we'll protect it. That's how they get their money in there from their own.
Think of it this way: if the ADL had it their way, it seems to me like they would love to pass laws that would make this conversation that we're having right now illegal in Australia if they had it their way. Yeah. Now, why would they seek to do that? Because there's too much truth in what we're saying, and so many Australians are completely oblivious to what is called the Jewish question. This aspect of why is it that they seem to be predominant in these industries at the top, whether it is media or banking or finance. Why do they do that? Why is cultural Marxism so heavily infested with Jewish characters, throughout history? Why is that the case? There must be a reason, but they don't want you to even know these basic facts, because once you know, you might actually start asking, why is this the case? Steven Spielberg makes these films about the so-called Holocaust, complete lies that have easily been proven to be lies, even based on the testimony of the so-called victims, taking their own testimonies from different times, comparing it to and saying, hold on, they're hugely inflating their own stories for the purpose of this film that's passed off as a documentary, that wins Academy Awards as a documentary. These are blatant lies. Why can Spielberg get away with it? Because the usual suspects control the media. Who's going to call him out on this stuff, Lindsay?
Yeah, I agree with it. And we've talked about this before. I can't get a letter in the Courier Mail as a letter to the editor, but they've wiped me off years ago. So I don't even bother now. That's just the way. No, true. And yet there'll be other people in there who are pushing their line, the cultural Marxism, and they'll get 2 letters a week. The same names keep recurring. So it gives you, once you're on the inside and you try doing this sort of stuff, you realise how they've got it controlled. Whereas, and I suppose most of the people listening to this program would know that stuff, because they will have been doing this themselves. But the outside world, they've got no idea. They think that letters to the editor represent what the population are thinking, and it just goes on like that.
Yeah, that's right. And I've got a sneaking suspicion, having been associated with Quest News and whatnot, that it's just classic Ash experiments in the letters to the editor. They'll let one through, and the rest, I suspect, and this is just my opinion, so don't take it as a statement, but my opinion is they just completely make up most of the letters to the editor to serve their agenda. They include one person that's pissed off, and then it makes him look like the crazy one on the page. The Ash experiment logic comes in, where everyone goes, no, well, he's the crazy one. Whereas if they let it be a balanced discussion, then you'd see that there's plenty of people out there that are pissed off about everything. They don't have any direction to face it, and most of the direction should be faced at certain interests that are in control, John.
And it's interesting when there's a fake event where they demonize Muslims. They say, look, this Muslim did this terrible thing. Let's all get angry at the Muslims and let's force the Muslim leaders to come out and say, we're not part of that. Force the Muslims to come out and speak against their own. We don't do that with the Jews. How often do you see Jews come out and say, well, it is true, we're overrepresented in banking finance? Some do, but they're a very small group. And I say be consistent. If you're going to force Muslim leaders to come out and say, just pretend that those fake Muslims, pretend that the Link Cafe was real for a moment, okay? Then you come out and say, the Muslim leaders have to say that Manhar and Monis doesn't represent us. Well, be consistent here. If you're going to say that, why don't you say the same thing to the regular Jews to come out and say, hey, listen, these evil things that some of the elite Zionist Jews are doing, we have no part of that. Be consistent here. And most people simply are far too consistent. And that's one of the things that bothers me is this hypocrisy, this rank hypocrisy and inconsistency. The least that you can expect of someone is to treat all people the same. And if you're going to say that we're going to tar all Muslims with the supposed actions of a few, well, why don't you do the same with the Jews?
That's exactly right. We're just speaking about consistency here, Johnno.
Yeah.
Facts and consistency, calling them out on their hypocrisy, and then in some way we'll be demonized for that because people are programmed to do that.
Absolutely. And a lot of people, if they were listening to this podcast and this was the first exposure they had to any of this, they'd be apoplectic right now. They'd be raging. How dare they? These people must be Johnno and Lindsay and Ethan must be hate-filled people and they must want to kill Jews and all the rest of it. Complete and utter nonsense. That's just the way that they've been programmed to think. Anyone who dares talk about this topic must be hate-filled, must be vile, must be violent, must want to do terrible things, when the truth is actually quite the contrary. We want people to see your media is lying to you. Your media is largely controlled by the usual suspects. And in fact, they want you to hate the Muslims. They want you to demonize the Muslims, all these evil Muslims, these evil things they're doing, to take attention away from the real criminals who happen to be a small group from a larger group, the larger Jewish diaspora. There's a small group within them who for some reason manage to control banking and finance and media. Why do they do it? How do they do it? We ought to be able to discuss that, Lindsay. And anyone who can't hear this conversation without an emotional response, that person has been programmed. Can they ever deprogram themselves? Well, I did. I think it can be done. But the majority of people, if they're watching television, if they're watching Hollywood movies, like, what was that stupid Spielberg film called? The Last Days. Complete and utter anti-white propaganda. That's what it is. Anti-white propaganda, complete lies, complete nonsense. If you're watching that kind of stuff, you're being programmed. The only way to try and unprogram yourself is to watch the documentaries that expose the lies, like Hitler's, Spielberg's hoax, Last Days of the Big Lie. You need to watch that. If you haven't watched that film and you're going to sit there and judge me, then you're nonsense. You've been programmed and I can't help you.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And we've spoken about this before. Like I know people, you even say the word Jew and you can see them visibly shrinking. You haven't said anything wrong. You just, even the word Jew, they're so scared that if anybody says Jew, you can see them. They sort of go, they don't go white, but you can see them backing off. I find it intriguing.
The power of the television over people's minds is utterly incredible. And if you use that tool to convince people that anyone who has a conversation we're having now is evil, you better believe people are going to believe that. Not all people, but enough people to stigmatize it. So even people who know what we know are scared to talk about it. And that's a problem. They're scared. And one of the things we try and do with this show, not just on this topic, but on all topics, is say, don't be scared of speaking the truth. How cowardly can you be to avoid talking about the truth for fear of being seen the wrong way? If anyone will judge you harshly for speaking the truth, then why would you care about their opinion of you in the first place? Their opinion isn't worth a pinch of salt. It's worth nothing if they're scared of you talking about the truth. And the truth is that the Federal Reserve, like I said, for 27 years has been controlled by Jewish people. Bringing it back to the article that you brought up. The Greeks know that. According to this ADL poll, the Greeks are happy to say that to a pollster. Why aren't more people aware of this? Why aren't more people speaking about this? It's because of the programming. And hopefully shows like this can be part of trying to help people to deprogram. There's nothing wrong with talking about the facts. And I had to go through an education system where I was told it was white men who were the problem with the world. That's what I was trained to believe. White men were the problem, and thank God we're taking away their power. What power? It's not white men who control banks. It's not white men who control the banking industry or the media. It's Jewish people.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Yeah.
Now we need to wrap the show up soon, Lindsay, but on this particular topic, any final thoughts?
No. That, I think we've said it all. And I think we've had a pretty good go round, actually. We've all contributed to that. So I'll just leave it at that. Thanks.
All right, then we'll move on to the final topic for international. And this is a new segment, Ethan, that we're calling Ethan's Honourable Mentions.
Yeah, thanks, Johnno. Hopefully, it will evolve to just all of us having honourable mentions. But I mentioned last week on the show, might have been on the show, might have been in the after show, that I wanted to introduce segments to the show, and we want to try and sort of freshen up the Australian Roundtable coming back next season. But there's so many important topics that are happening right now that I thought I'd try and introduce it this week, see what would happen. It won't be every week on the show, just when there's a big news week or whatever. And the premise is, for those who are unaware, a lot of people do say we don't cover this topic and that topic and this topic, and it's not because we don't think it's an important topic. It's because sometimes you can't expand on the topic, and we're trying to fill a 2-hour show here. We want to have discussion about things. So I thought a new segment like this would be a way to include some of these topics, to include some of this, and really freshen up the show a little bit. So I've got 4 honourable mentions for this week that didn't make it in the show for these various reasons. The first one was poison dropped in forest by New Zealand government, and that was 1,080 units of poison were dropped on a forestry block in the Hunua Ranges, southeast of Auckland, signalling a 5-day closure of tracks in the Ranges regional parks. They are using the excuse of rats and poisons as a way to justify the state taking these measures. So they blame rats and possums to dump all poison throughout all of this. It's just state-sponsored, environmental destruction, and the New Zealanders they're upright about it this week. The second one, and I'll throw it over to you for a discussion, Lindsay, but the second one was that the US stock market had its worst day in 4 years. They lost like $3.3 trillion or something. And this was because China shook the markets all around the world on Friday, which drove the US stock market down to its biggest loss. And then it spread from the deflation of the Chinese currency. It spread to Europe, hitting Germany and France. In the US, investors ditched the oil companies and Netflix and all of these things, whilst oil fell below 40. So as a result, the market lost $3.3 trillion or something like that. And now with matters like this, we've spoken about on the show a number of times, but Lindsay, this is something I thought was well worth a mention, because it wasn't just the typical, the stock market is, the confidence has dropped, blah, 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 the same old merry-go-round. This was a major thing that happened this week. And I just wanted to know if you'd seen it or if you had any thoughts on it.
Yeah, I've got a couple of articles that I had planned, but we'll just run out of time, because it's just like you're saying, if you try to do everything and have a full discussion on it, it just chews up the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've got I get a newsletter from America, and the same thing, they're saying this is the worst since 2008.
Yeah.
And it is full on. Whereas up till now, you're just doomsayers or whatever. Well, no, it's actually happening now. So yeah, I'm well aware of it. Where it'll go from here, I don't know.
Yeah, well, I've seen articles through the week, economists saying get ready for the global crash, and they're saying because of China's slow economy that this is happening. 20 points as to why this is happening with the graphs, and I don't usually buy into the sort of fear mongering, this is what's going to happen, a crash is coming, whatnot. But I've said on the show before that I believe that it's going to be a destabilized collapse by design. But to see this during the week, I thought that was interesting. And obviously, you can't bring it up on the show because it's not too much to expand on. It's just all predictable guesswork. So that's why I wanted to include it here, Johnno. But did you see that the US stock market lost $3.3 trillion the other day?
I haven't been following the news that closely, so I didn't see that one. But I guess for me, I'd bring it back to the issue of when the stock market loses money, if you've never done your own research, you would think that this is an organic thing, that this has just happened by chance and what have you. I think if you've done any research, you'll understand the same people, the usual suspects, also control the financial markets. So if there's an up or a down, I personally wouldn't worry about it in the slightest. In fact, I think one of the big problems with alternative media is it's all completely fear-based. And a lot of people love the fear. They love thinking that tomorrow or the week after could be the collapse. And they're in this constant state of fear. And you can make money from pumping out those kinds of videos or those kinds of articles saying, be worried, a stock market crash, whatever. I'm not sure it's really that helpful. Why? Even if you knew that a genuine collapse, like something that happened in the 1920s was coming soon, why would you worry about it? You could prepare for it, plan for it. But any time that you spend worrying is, I think, wasted time. And worse than that, you only get so much time in the first place to spend any of it worried in that state that makes it hard to think. I think that's what our enemies want. So I try to avoid worrying about any of that kind of nonsense. In fact, I don't even follow it. You tell me the stock market's up 3 trillion, you tell me it's down 3 trillion, putting aside the fact this is all make-believe numbers in the first place, even if it was real, why would I worry about it?
Yeah, and that's why I didn't include it in the show, because we all sort of have the same belief on that, that it's all a rigged game or whatnot. I just thought it was interesting because, as I said, I've seen a lot of fear mongering over the years, but this one was different. You know, the Chinese economy slowing is different because, and it's all based on perception again. You know, if people believe that money's real and the stock markets are crashing and it's affecting countries and it eventually filters down to the people. As long as the people believe that the money's real, they're the ones that are going to be hurting. So I just want to include that. The third one was the GST is set to be added to online purchases for products that import to Australia. So once again, we're allowing this criminal government to get away with this garbage and tax us even further. You know, Joe Hockey's saying that another 10% GST for all of this stuff. And we've already got enough taxes in this country. But the fourth and final one was more of a lighter note that we sort of started the show on, and it was more ISIS propaganda, Johnno. And this was Australian defence officials, public servants, and a member of parliament have been placed on a frightening Islamic State hit list. Counter-terrorism Minister Michael Keenan confirmed that 8 Australians have had their details compromised, Sky News reported, and Australia's top IS fighter, Neil Prakash from Melbourne, sent the list to his 1,100 followers on Twitter and urged them to attack. And one post that he shared, said, "Kill them where you find them and enslave their women." And that's the propaganda that's being pushed out this week, you know. And obviously, we've expanded multiple times on the Islamic State and the bullshit that they're propagandizing in the mainstream media, Jono. But that was something I wanted to have as an honourable mention, because now they're going to use that for further justifications here in this country, and it's just the same nonsense.
This is more propaganda about ISIS, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Most of our listeners, most people who listen to this podcast know full well that ISIS is at best an exaggeration, or if they're further along the spectrum like me, a complete fabrication. It's all make-believe nonsense. And I suppose we can talk about it on the show, and we do, and I'm glad that we do. What's more important is that we talk about this with our friends and family. I mean, we don't have to say to them, you know, ISIS is fake. Just question them. Why, when the TV tells you ISIS is a problem, why do you believe the TV? Just question them. Why? That's oftentimes when people believe nonsense or pushing nonsense, you don't need to come at them with the angle of, no, you're wrong. Just say, okay, why do you believe that though? Just because it's on the TV. Sometimes just asking these simple questions can be enough to possibly get them thinking. Are you going to undo the programming in one question in one day? Of course not. But if enough people were just out there saying, yeah, but why do you believe that? Because it was on the television. Really? It was in the newspaper, so you believe it. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm not going to try and change your mind if that's what you believe because it was on the TV, but that seems a bit weird to me that you just believe because it's on the television. Yeah,
that's right. And the reason I just wanted to bring it up is because it's us that know what's happening. We can use what's happening as a way to sort of path where they want to go in the future, because we've seen ISIS propaganda has taken away all our rights of anti-terrorism legislation with everything. And now that public servants and officials and government officials in this country have a supposed hit list on them, I thought it'd be appropriate just to bring it up, just so our listeners who hadn't heard of it during the week might coax a connection somewhere, might look it up, might see where they're going for this, because who knows, they'll try to justify anything to bring it up. But that's all I've got for honourable mentions, Jono.
Well, the time is perfect because we have come towards the end of the official upload. Of course, we've got the after show coming up, so listeners stay tuned. But it's time for our final thoughts. So for episode 46 on August 23, Lindsay, any final thoughts for the show?
Well, one of the things that this last episode, you're just talking about the stock market and that fuel had come down to $40 a barrel.
Yeah.
And that amazed me because at the shop down here, it's $1.49 or some damn thing, you know. So what happened to when it was 80 or 90, you know? Anyway, it just shows you they're just playing silly buggers with us. Yeah. Anyway, there's not that actually just pretty much sums up everything that I would have to say to finish up. This whole system is just so rotten and just such propaganda. Doesn't matter what you look at, what you discuss, it's always the same, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly right.
So I'll leave it at that.
Well, it's good to have you here in the studio again, Lindsay. If this is the last time for a while that you might be able to get up, it's good to have all three of us here, have a special guest with us. It's so much better when you're in the live studio. So thank you for coming up, Lindsay. My final thoughts, I'm going to be on Fair Dinkum Radio on the 26th of August, which is on Wednesday this week. And then it'll be uploaded to the website for you to look at. We're just going to go through a couple articles we've seen in the news, probably ones that we've covered on this show, have a discussion about it. And I'm really looking forward to discussing it with Leon, because when I started Australian Alternative Media
Good stuff. Well, we've had more than 50 live listeners for most of the show, and we do appreciate them for coming out on a Sunday at 3 p.m. Australian time. There are other things people could be doing, but they tune into us. We do appreciate it. And no matter where you are around the world, it means a lot to us that you come along. Those people in the live chat participating, I know it can be frustrating when we have, today I've had to ban more than 40 troll accounts. So I know it can be frustrating when you're putting up with the trolls, but thank you for bearing with us during that. And the more that you get trolled, Lindsay, it normally tells me the better the job that you're doing. So I say bring it on. To those of you who listen on MP3, I do apologize that it's taken me a couple of weeks to upload. The last couple of weeks worth of MP3, I've been putting so much time into other projects lately that sadly it has taken me longer than I'd like, but I can guarantee you those will be up there within a few days. We'll get back episodes 44, 45, and of course this episode 46. And we do encourage people to listen on MP3 because you never know what YouTube's going to do with your account, but at least with our Podbean MP3 account, people can rest assured that all going well, those podcasts are there, and usually more than 100 people download those podcasts, and we appreciate them doing that. It is time to wrap up the show. We are going to go to an after show, so stick around, live listeners, but for episode 46 of the official show, it is time to wrap it up. I want to say thanks for being listening to John LeBon, Lindsay the Silver Fox, and of course Ethan Nash of TOTT News. We'll see you guys at 3 p.m. Brisbane time next week.
Thank you for that.